Welcome to the Kindred Journey Podcast, the podcast where women share their experiences of stepping into courage when comfort is no longer an option. This is the podcast for connecting in community with women who have been shaped by the liberating to challenging seasons that life endures. I am your host, Leslie. I am a wife, mother, daughter, sister, and friend. I too have experienced these seasons in life, and I want you to know that you are surrounded by a community of courageous, real women here for you. I can't wait to connect, so grab your favorite beverage and join me on this kindred journey. In this episode, I talked to Suzanne Barron about finding joy in the hard. She goes into a season that no mom could imagine, and it is her son's journey with leukemia at a very young age. And Suzanne talks about how they did not want cancer to define Christopher's life or their lives as a family. And Suzanne talks about the courage that she had through these seasons in her son's early life. And she talked about how anger is an easy emotion to deal with and much more than fear. And we talk about wisdom and guilt and forgiveness and God and practicing a gratitude journal and how much that can impact you through times of hard. Suzanne is so full of wisdom and such a wonderful human and was so great to talk to. So please welcome Suzanne to the Kindred Journey podcast and grab your tissues because I even got teary-eyed in this interview, and re-listening to this episode, I got teary-eyed again. So please join me in welcoming Suzanne and finding joy in the hard. Hi, Suzanne. How are you today?
Hi, Leslie. Thank you so much for having me as a guest.
Oh, well, thank you for being on. I'm a little bit honored because I feel like I've followed your story through the last few months of a course that we ended up taking together. And your story is so courageous. I've listened to the first few episodes of your podcast that launched a few weeks ago, and I'm just excited for what you're doing and similar kind of parallel purposes or reasons why, we're sharing wonderful, courageous, brave stories. And I appreciate you for sharing your story here today. And I know a little bit about you, but maybe you could give a little bit of an intro to the guests and the listeners here today.
Sure. And thank you. Thank you. I am so honored to be here. So currently I've been teaching yoga for 13 years. Most recently, I've been teaching at my local community college. I teach high school and college students it's a college course. So I teach yoga for stress management. I also, I yoga and meditation for 13 years. I also am something called a Shin Jyutsu practitioner. And basically what that is, it's using your hands via light touch on different places in your body and breath to release pain and discomfort. And it's incredible. I was visiting my mom at the hospital earlier, and the way I was twisting, talking to her, my middle back started hurting. And so I literally just held a space on my upper arm for a few minutes and the pain went away.
Oh,
I mean, it's
wow.
that powerful. So the reason I'm sharing with like what I do now, these were all practices that I found after my little boy passed from leukemia. He had leukemia 3 times, ages 3, 8, and 9. And sadly, he passed when he was 9. And I am currently like a message that I have with my podcast and also on a memoir that I'm finishing up, which has the same name, Finding Joy in the Hard, is that if you were to look at my life, you'd be like, oh my God, you have such a terrible life. But it's not like that at all, right? So he had leukemia 3 times, but he only had leukemia for 5 months out of those 6 years because he was in remission most of the time. And we had so much fun and laughter and joy that, yes, there was so much joy amidst the hard, but those were the facts. They didn't define my life. Those practices helped me. Some of them I practiced already. Yoga and meditation was part of my life while he was alive. And then post his death, they became like lifesavers for me because I was in a very terrible place after he died.
I can't even imagine, and I'm so sorry for your loss, and thank you for sharing how you didn't let your son's cancer and death define who you were, and like you said,
Mm,
there was so much joy in that, in the hard. And thank you for sharing that. I'm looking forward to our conversation. And before we do dive in, I just want you to know that this is a safe space for you to share your story. I appreciate you coming on here to share, be vulnerable and share your season of courage. And your story is honored and respected. So please feel free to speak freely and however it sees fit to serve you. So
thank
um
you. I appreciate that.
yeah. So yeah, I guess we'll just kind of dive right in. If you could share a moment or a season of hard that where you did step into courage when comfort was no longer an option.
So when my boys were babies, I have two boys. When my boys were babies, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. So basically, that means you're worried about everything all the time. And Christopher, my oldest, was a preemie, so that was, hard. But he was 9 weeks early, but he had no residual side effects. Like he was
Mhm.
completely healthy after he was completely caught up by a year, maybe 18 months. But the hardest thing for me was when he had woken up. I'm just going to give you a little bit of the background. He had
Yes.
woken up one morning. He was 3, his little brother was 1, and he'd woken up and he had a cough, a cough. And he was a little sluggish when he was playing chase with his brother around the house. And if we hadn't been about to go out of town to my cousin's wedding, I would have never even have taken him to the pediatrician because it
Mhm.
was, cough and some sluggishness. Didn't think much of it, but we were going out of town. It was a 6-hour drive, ran him in. She's like, I hear something in his lungs. Take, just do some nebulizer treatments. I don't even think she gave us an antibiotic.
Mm.
And so we went off on our trip, and over the weekend he got subsequently worse. But it was kind of in the back of my head. I was like, well, I took him to the pediatrician, and I was in contact with the pediatrician, and they said he was fine. And I already had all this anxiety. So, every headache could be a possible brain tumor. Every like chest pain could be, like a heart attack. So I am sure I'm over worrying. It's got to be that. And no one else seemed to be worrying. And then we were at the reception, and my sister, who's in between my two boys' ages, has asthma. And she
Mm.
looked at me and she said, I think they were sitting in a side-by-side stroller, and my little one was breathing 4 times for every one breath of my older son. And so she said, you got to go to the ER. I think he's having an asthmatic attack. And so we went to the ER, and, each thing just got worse. Like we were told, they did x-rays and they found out he had a collapsed lung.
Oh,
That's why he
wow.
couldn't breathe. He couldn't breathe because he had a collapsed lung. We thought that would be the worst. And they sent us to a larger hospital because they couldn't drain it without injury. And so we went to a larger hospital. We were all the way up in upstate New York, and close to Canada. So, I mean, it wasn't,
Wow.
I know some people say upstate New York is like 2 hours from here. It wasn't that upstate New York. And there they took loads and loads of tests. And the next morning, we're thinking, drain the lug, go home. We're thinking, we'll
Hmm.
stop by Olean, where the wedding was. That's Olean, New York. And we'll pick up our younger son and we'll go home. And they take us into a windowless room, my husband and I, and 2 doctors with white coats come in. And one of the doctors says, I think your son has a malignancy. And I'm like, what? He's he's too young. He's only 3. He hasn't been alive long enough to develop cancer. How does that work? Needless to say, we were a mess, and it was horrible. He was medevaced home, and we found out. They said it might be an infection, like a sliver of a chance it could be an infection. So I held on to that, even though once you say cancer, it's hard to move away from that. But I'm like, well, maybe, I said to my husband, maybe it's an infection. We found out the next day it was indeed leukemia. It was the most common kind of leukemia, childhood leukemia, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Treatment was very long. It was 2.5 years. Remember, I told you I was like, had off the charts anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think if I was on medication by then. I probably was on medication. It started it when the boys were younger. I didn't want my boys to pick up on my anxieties.
Mm-hmm.
And but it wasn't cutting it. Like, I had to increase the dosage. But I didn't know how to function. Like, I just didn't know how to function. And we were so, we were so devastated by what happened. Thankfully, when you have leukemia like this, you get into remission if all goes well. And with 90% of the kids, all goes well. They get into remission within 28 days. So he was in remission within 28 days. No, treatment was long. It was 2.5 years. But just knowing that he had no visible cancer in his body was huge.
Mm-hmm.
And it shifted. It shifted. Don't get me wrong. We were still stressed, putting chemo in a little child's body. My husband, so you didn't hear this on my podcast because I didn't share it because it would have just been too many directions.
Mm.
But my husband worked in the World Trade Center on 9/11.
Oh my gosh.
So the morning of 9/11, as we know, was a beautiful blue sky day. And we both woke up both woke up and he wanted to go for a run and I wanted to go for a run. I'm like, I have to go to clinic. You just have to go to work. But something in me, and I don't know what it was like, fine, you go. I could take them in the baby jogger later. He was late for work that day because he was on the ferry. Now he'll tell you, I'm only on the 40th floor. Almost everyone got out. I'm like, there was debris falling everywhere. So thank God nothing happened to him, right? But that was more. So here, we already have the panic. And then not only taking my child for chemo, and he would fight me, Mommy, don't take me back there. They're mean to me. They hurt me. My other little guy was like, take me, don't leave me home. And then my husband, every time he went to work, I was like, oh no, will he come home? So, so much heavy, but huge buts. As much as I had the anxiety, my boys getting to be little boys was more important than like just getting stuck in the fear. Mm-hmm. And so I did a couple of things. So one of the things, Christopher had a catheter in his chest, and you have a catheter anytime you have frequent chemo. And so if you have a catheter, you have to go to the hospital if you get a fever back then it was 100.5 Fahrenheit, in case you have listeners overseas. And so, you have to go to the ER to make sure it's not something serious. So I didn't ever want to be like, well, I'm really tired today. Let's go to the park tomorrow, because tomorrow we might be going to the ER. You just never know. And the thing is, no one knows. We all live like we have 1,000 tomorrows, but no one knows. Mm-hmm. So I made sure we did one fun thing a day, no matter what. So it could be, spaghetti pots and pillows and tennis balls in the living room, making an obstacle course. Or it could be, we'd put on our rain slickers and our rain boots and play outside in the rain if it was raining, or we'd go to the park. We'd always do something fun, because it was partially the fact that we might have to go to the hospital, but that wasn't the only reason. Like I said, treatment was long, 2.5 years. Christopher would be 5.5, almost 6 when he finished treatment. Ryan would be 3.5. And so they would never get to be those young ages again. Mm-hmm. So I didn't want to miss those young ages by living in fear. So I forced myself, and it wasn't easy, because even though I was in medicine takes the edge off, but I still had anxiety. But their livelihood, their having fun was more important to me. And something my husband said, because he knew I could totally wrap myself around the cause and want to get invested in research and fundraising. And while that's all very important, my plate was already way too full. So he said to me, I think on like day 3, this will not define Christopher and it will not define us. He is bigger. Christopher's bigger than cancer and we are bigger than this. So, and that was like, oh, okay, I hear you. No, let somebody else be in charge of that. I have enough to do. And thank goodness, right? Thank goodness I didn't take that challenge on because it wasn't meant to be my challenge. I had other challenges. So, yeah. And then one other thing I did, which was really powerful, a friend of mine whose son was also going through chemo. He was 4. Christopher was 3. And she said, Suzanne, we're going to have really good times during these 2.5 years. And we're going to not notice them if we don't write them down. So I'm starting a gratitude journal. And I said, oh, what a brilliant idea. I'm going to do that too. And if you've never kept a gratitude journal before, you don't know the impact in that by focusing on the positive and giving less weight to the negative, your mind shifts, your mindset shifts. And so you start to see the good things in your life, giving less, and you don't notice the harder things as much. I mean, of course they're there, but I'll give you an easier example since cancer is such a heavy topic.
Sure.
And now that I teach the high school and college students, for 1 week, they have to keep a gratitude journal. And of course, they have to answer 4 questions. And the first question is, what did you think of this assignment? And, I really love when the high school students do it because the college students are older and they may say the same thing, but they say it a little bit more eloquently. Like the high school students are like, I thought this was so dumb. I thought this was a waste of my time. Like they just lay it out. But what's so remarkable at the end, it's just 7 days. They say, I had no idea how I overlooked all the little things in my day. And I didn't realize that I was focusing on the things that go wrong in my day. And just by keeping this gratitude journal, I focused on the things that went right. And one kid said, I never knew there were so many colors in a sunset. There's 16. So the gratitude journal and the one thing, fun thing a day helped shift. And we were fortunate in that Christopher did very well on treatment. He was never hospitalized again during that whole time, those 2.5 years. So he was home every night we were home every night with my husband and my younger son, so we could do a dance party in the kitchen. We could do volleyball in the living room with a balloon, we did a lot of fun things.
Yeah. I just all the courageous things that you chose to the paths and the journeys that you chose to take through these years of a lack of control, for a better word. Because you don't know how treatment's going to go. You didn't know how the day was going to go. You embraced life to the fullest in the present moment that you were. And that's such a beautiful thing. And we think we have control. We think we know we have tomorrow. We think, we think we have all this control. In reality, we don't, and we can either spiral or embrace it. And I mean, you chose to embrace it, and that is such a beautiful thing. And I think with the gratitude journal practice, focusing on what goes right versus what goes wrong, because what we can find, you could have focused every day on, oh, my son has cancer, when is this going to end? Or, you could have really had a negative mindset towards this journey, and you chose to be in the present. You chose to give him a good life and for it to not define you and your family and Christopher. And I think it's such a beautiful story. It breaks my heart, but it's so beautiful. There's so many beautiful things in there, and I appreciate you sharing that. And if you don't mind going on and sharing how this season of courage kind of just evolved for you.
So I do want to add, thank you. I did spiral, trust me, I did spiral.
Sure.
Because like I had this huge, you know, I I didn't want to go, I didn't know it at the time, but I didn't want to go on meds. I took some meds after he died, and I actually stopped them because they numbed me. So I was glad I was never on those meds. I was on different meds. I was on a med for, it's called Buspar. It was for depression, but it worked really well with anxiety. It was off label for anxiety. So I still did spiral. I just spiraled in different ways. Like I think I drove my husband insane because sometimes, because like if, so I worried about, I really became attached to food. So, you know, if he ate under, my husband, he loved, they all loved, the three of them, my two boys and my husband loved over easy eggs with bacon and cheese on a bagel, right? And one of the oncologists, the pediatric oncologist, was like, wow, the immune system is low. That might not be good for him. So I'd be like, you have to cook the eggs more. I'm sure like it made him crazy, or you didn't wash your hands well enough. You touched bacon and then you touched his plate. So definitely I did spiral. I don't want it to sound like I didn't, or I had to give him something called 6-MP, which is a chemo that he took every day. It was a pill.
Okay.
And I used to, you have to cut it. And I would listen for the crack. And if I didn't hear the crack, I would call the pharmacist and say, there was no crack. He'd say, Suzanne, did you wash your hands? And I'd say, yes. And then he'd say, okay, well, your hands were probably a little wet. It doesn't affect the efficacy. I'm like, okay. Because if you're getting this chemo every single day and you're affecting the efficacy, that's really bad. So I had really supportive people in my life, which was huge. So Christopher did fabulous on treatment the first time around. I mean, he was back in school. He played sports. We went on vacation. Life was like, there were so many funny moments. I remember he was riding his bike one time. This is just like giving an example of what kind of kid Christopher was. We were in the park, and every time he crashed his bike, I think because he was laughing so hard, he'd get up and he'd tell the whole scenario about like why he crashed his bike. And one time he like crashed and he's like, oh, I closed my eyes because I was laughing so hard. But it wasn't like, oh, I have a cut on my knee. It was like, oh my gosh, you have to hear what happened to me. And he was that kind of kid. And Ryan was the same. And they were the best little buddies. They were only 23 months apart. And then Christopher was 8 when he started having really high fevers, like 105 fevers for a week. Wow. I have to say, I didn't think anything of it because I've been told so many times when he got sick. Now, he didn't get sick that often, no more than any other kid. But when he did, they'd be like, Mrs. Barron, this is a normal childhood illness. Don't worry, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. So when he got this high fever, I was like, oh, it's scary, but normal childhood illness. And the pediatrician he saw that day was like, you need to go get a chest x-ray because I think he had a bad cough. He did have a bad cough. And he needs to have blood work. I'm like, okay, that's weird, but whatever. Went for blood work. And then when they called us with the results, 2 doctors were in the room. One of Christopher's pediatricians was a hematologist, and he was on the oncology team where he was treated. And I was like, what is he doing in the room? And so they, long story, unfortunately, they ruled it viral. He got another week-long fever of 105 in February. They ruled it viral again in March. They ruled it viral. And I was worrying, but I was happy it was viral. I didn't want it to be anything else. Then Easter Sunday, they were out looking for Easter eggs. And he looked a little pale, and I'm like, nope, I'm not going there. And then we were in mass, and he leaned over and he's like, Mom, I'm hot. And I bit my cheek so hard it bled. And we called, and they're like, okay, we need to figure out what's going on. Let's do a bone marrow tap to rule out leukemia. And of course, it wasn't ruled out. And, a relapse is so much worse than the first time. I wouldn't say it's definitely clinically it's worse. Was it worse being told the first time? I don't know. You know what I mean? I don't know. Someone said to me, and I think they were trying to console me, but they didn't. They said, oh, well, you're lucky. How could lucky be in my life? You're lucky because you know what to expect. I was like, do you know what a relapse is? It's the worst thing possible. And you never tell a mother who had a child that just relapsed, they're lucky. I'm sorry. Like, no, at any rate, he got in remission again really fast, 28 days. And then he was in remission. He was doing fabulous. Back in school, sports, treatment was harder, but we'd go skiing. Life was, as normal as I could make it. And then one of the chemos caused a more aggressive cancer.
Mm.
And they couldn't get him into remission. And we moved him from our local hospital because the first cancer was very well known. It was very well documented. Everyone treated it the same way. The relapse, we had 6 second opinions because we were told to get a second opinion. So we got 6, went to the top doctors in the country, all the names you would think of, purposely not saying the names since I'm writing a memoir and I changed the names in the book. And because, protection of them.
Sure.
So, and then we transferred to a big hospital in the city and they just couldn't get him into remission.
Mm.
So he passed within 3 months. And before I used the word devastated, I was very careful. I was very conscious to say devastated because we weren't devastated. We were destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to live. I wanted to die. I wouldn't do anything about it because I had a younger child, but I just talked about wanting to die all the time. And, it makes me sad that I said it in front of my younger son. I always thought he wasn't near, but I'm sure he was. We talk about it now. He knows he's 23 now. He knows we were doing the best we could to hold it together.
Mm-hmm.
How
old was he?
7.
Wow.
So he and I slept in Christopher's bed. So the first night we came home from the hospital, worst ever. I always tell parents, you can't possibly imagine it because whatever you can imagine, it's a billion times worse because you can never imagine when you have your children with you because you just can't. And that's a good thing. You should never be able to imagine it because it's the worst thing ever, and I still, even now I can talk. I am a little disassociated when I talk about it because I have to be, because I think if I weren't, I wouldn't be able to share it. And I point that out because, people might say, oh my God, I don't know how she can speak so eloquently. I wouldn't be able to speak at all. It's been 16 years, but still, if I focus on my precious child, I get like, I just, I still can't believe in some days, I can't believe it happened. Like, I can't believe he left.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't believe he died, even though I know he's okay because he told me. So he came to me in 3 dreams, 3 different dreams. And one of them was, I don't know how long it was after, but, and there's a difference between visits and dreams. I learned that after he died, and also talking to friends of mine who lost their spouses, in 9/11 and things like that. But he came to me and I looked at him. He was across the street from the house, and he had a lot of bruising on his thighs because they were giving him shots to raise his white blood count. And then he also had chapped hands because he knew that he washed his hands a lot because he didn't want to have germs, because he knew, I think, he was not a germophobic, but his mom was. And so, so he's standing across the street and his thighs are clear and his hands are clear. And I grabbed his hands and I'm like, oh my God, they're not chapped. And I said, oh my God, we have to go tell your brother you're back. And I took his hand and I went to pull him across the street. And you know how you pull someone and they don't move. And I'm like, wait a minute, you're not coming, are you? And he said, no. And then I looked at him and I said, you're not staying. He said, no, I just came to tell you I'm okay. In another dream, he was, like Mother's Day, my first Mother's Day. I was with him in school, but it seemed like a regular dream at first. And then right before I woke up, I was squatting in front of his desk, and I stood up and he reached for my hand and he said, "Thank you, Mom."
Mm.
I haven't shared that story yet anywhere. Um, and and I knew it was a gift for Mother's Day.
Well, thank you for sharing. You got me
Yeah,
teary-eyed.
I
Um,
know.
and what a gift, especially on Mother's Day. And yeah, I just maybe you could share. You said that there's a difference in visions and dreams. Maybe how did you learn that, or how did you discover that?
So I was at the gym one day, and I was talking to a friend of mine who lost her brother at in 9/11. And she said, did you notice that Christopher's skin was so much more clear? And I wasn't even thinking of like the bruised legs and the chapped hands. And I said, well, he was 9, so he already had really clear skin. Or maybe she said his face was really young. And I said he was already young. So no, I didn't notice that. But when her brother came, visited them, and he visited all of them because they're a big family, and he always had like really young skin. Even though he might have been the same age, he had young skin. And other people, so visits have a message. I
Mm.
am not a therapist, let's put this out there, but I just through my life experience, there's definitely things that you become an expert in because of your life experience, but I'm not a clinician or anything like that. But yeah, he had messages for me for sure. Um, I mean, even in a silly dream one time, he was running with my nephew, and he said, "Mom, you can't expect me to run in my old shoes. My feet have grown."
That's so
You
sweet.
know. So yeah, so a dream, I think when you have a big loss like this, it's a dream is for me, most of my dreams were scary, and
Mm.
and very fear-based. And it's interesting because I've shared this dream in interviews, people I've interviewed, and it's remarkable the number of people who've said they've had the same dream, which is really crazy. So in my case, I would have dreams that he was in the hospital and I didn't know it and I didn't visit him.
Mm.
So like worst dream ever, right? And
Yeah.
I had those a lot. And interestingly enough, I spoke to 2 different women who lost their husbands, and one of them who lost their husband to cancer had the same dream.
Oh, wow.
So it's, yeah. And a visit is, so she was saying, I was interviewing this mom, her name's Lucy. She's in our class, and she lost her husband to cancer. And she said in one dream, he just came up and gave her a great big hug. And I'm
Mm.
like, oh, that's a visit.
Yeah,
That's a visit.
I like that. I really like the visit. I
Yeah.
like visits more than dreams.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes you can have a fantastic dream, right? You can have the most incredible dream. But I think it's when someone who's passed comes to visit you.
Hmm.
Like my dad came to my dream to help me. My dad passed 2 years after Christopher. He came into my dream 2 years. No, no, no. He came into my, I was dreaming, having nightmares, one nightmare after another every night. And it was probably like 4 years out. And then my dad came into the dream to stop the dreams. Is that crazy?
Mm. Daddy's protecting his little girl.
Yeah.
You said earlier, and I'm not trying to be offensive or anything, but you said somebody said, "Oh, you're so lucky you've been through this before. You know what it is the second time." Do you feel lucky? I mean, looking back, do you feel lucky to know Christopher? Lucky? I mean, what is your perspective on that word? I know, like you said, it's happening again. That's not lucky. How much more
So
lucky can
no,
I
I
get?
was completely offended by that comment because it was someone who should have known given her own story.
Mm.
But 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 I should say, I'm going to answer that, but I should say anger is a much easier emotion to deal with.
Hmm.
Anger, we all can wrap our head around anger.
Hmm.
Um, Devastation, fear, much tougher. So yes, her comment really annoyed me. Stronger language than that,
Sure.
but I won't use it. um, but even I am going to get to your answer. But after Christopher died, I got really easily angry at people,
Mm.
and my husband even commented on it. my siblings would say something and I would get so angry with them. And someone might say something. I know my friends were like, I probably said something really dumb. And I'm like, actually, you didn't. But some people said the wrong thing. And, once I was stronger, I recognized that, like they'd say, well, he's no longer in pain. And I'd say, well, he was 9. And when you have cancer, you have to go through pain to get through the other side. So like that wasn't helpful to me. But once I got stronger, I realized they were just doing the best they could and they didn't know what to say. But when I was in deep grief, everything, and I didn't forget your question.
You're fine. No, please take it and run with it how you want to. That's just something that kind of, I just came to me and thought I'd want to dig deeper a little bit on. So take it how you want to.
Okay, thank you. So after his death, I felt like my skin was, it's going to be graphic, but it has some positives to it. It felt like my skin was, a layer of my skin was taken off, like peeled off. And I say that because on one hand, everything, like there was no filter. So, if life is ordinary, you can be like, yeah, that was stupid, but you just go on and you let it go. But everything hurt so much more because I didn't have that extra layer of protection. On the flip side of it, I saw things so much more clearly. So it was fall. He died in mid-July. And the fall after, I'd walk around the park and I'm like, I never saw, gosh, have trees always been that beautiful? I'm in New Jersey, so we have autumn, a very rich autumn. I was like, wow. And then I also had such incredible insight. I really couldn't speak about my feelings. I really couldn't share. If I did, like I would call a friend and just sob the whole time. I couldn't, and I didn't talk a lot about my feelings because I tried to hold it together when I could in front of Ryan, my younger son. And so I sent emails out. And the emails were I'm a writer, so that helps. And I would put it out there and people were like, God, you have such wisdom. You have such depth. And I felt like I was 42 when he died. I felt like a 84-year-old woman with wisdom I shouldn't have had. Because I shouldn't have had that wisdom. I wasn't alive long enough, but I had that wisdom because I lost my little boy. So lucky, no, I definitely didn't feel lucky, but a medical professional referred to Christopher as unlucky. And I didn't like that word because I truly do not believe he was unlucky. I truly believe unlucky. Like, it's interesting, like if you were to talk me to now, someone was saying like, do you want more luck in your life? And I'm like, oh, I am a lucky person. Good things happen to me. Not that, but I can say I'm lucky. I don't know if somebody else can tell me I'm lucky. Does that make sense? It's almost like, I'll tell you this, like I started a foundation in Christopher's name. So that was another part of my healing. I had to do something. After Christopher passed, and I used the word died for a long time. I now use the word passed. And people would say to me, don't use the word died. It's too offensive. And I'd be like, yes, and that's why I use it. Because if you're uncomfortable for what, 10 seconds, it's my life. I interviewed one of the women I interviewed. She's a therapist. And she said it so beautifully. She said, other people get to parachute in and out of our lives. It's with us all the time. And so, but I forgot where I was going with that. But the foundation. So I really wanted to do something. Okay. Backing up a little bit more. After Christopher died, I couldn't accept that he wasn't here. I had a lot of guilt. And I can talk about that if you want me to. I had a lot of guilt and I couldn't accept that he was gone. Like, no. Like, I joined this online grief group because I couldn't do in-person ones. The grief in the room was too heavy. And people were posting pictures of their kids. I'm like, oh no, I'm not posting Christopher there because he's not part of that group. Like, that's how I felt. Even though I used them for support and leaned on them and I helped them, I couldn't have my child's picture there. And so I did everything I could to keep him present. No one in my house spoke about him after he died. My husband started talking to him about him regularly after a year. It was just too painful. He said, I just can't do it. And Ryan was 7, so I appreciated it, but I was still like a bull in a china shop, because I was like, I cannot act like he disappeared. Like, he did disappear, but I can't not talk about him. And my husband now thanks me, because I kept him present and starting the foundation. So I couldn't do anything with cancer because I couldn't be in that realm. So Christopher used to like to create his own comic books and sell them on the front lawn. So I gathered my closest friends who were moms of Christopher's friends. And we started a foundation where we teach the kids there's a community not far from my house. And so we go in there and we bring professionals from New York City, and they learn to create comics like the professionals. And when I talk about the foundation, I say the reason I wanted to do it is because we had a really good life. We had a really good life. My boys had a lot of hope and opportunities. We had hope. We had so much hope. I have a really strong faith. I didn't for a while. I was super angry with God. And I yelled at him in many choice words. And one of my friends who worked at the church said, at least you're still talking to him. So, but by having that strong faith, I really thought God would save Christopher. And when he didn't, my faith was shattered, but I had to find my way back. I know I'm going in circles a lot. I had to find my way back so I didn't talk to him, him being God. And I didn't talk to him. That's why the Oprah show was interested in talking to me. So because I wrote, so for your viewers, I got an email saying that Oprah Daily, that's what her new, it's behind a paywall now. You have to be a subscriber, but she was doing a shooting in New York City, and they were doing a show on forgiveness. And I wrote in the subject line, I had trouble forgiving God after my son died. And he's like, who has trouble forgiving God? You just either say he doesn't exist, or you're angry at him, but you don't actually still have that active relationship where like, I can't forgive you. But I had to forgive him because I couldn't function without reading the Bible. I had done some Bible studies in the past, but I remember saying to my sister, like, you can go without praying every day. Your life won't change. If I don't practice Bible study every day, and I would skip it. I'd be like, okay, God, thanks. I'm strong enough now. I don't need you. And then I'd crash. But I had to read it. I couldn't pray. I didn't know how to pray. I didn't have the words. Not like, what am I supposed to ask for to save my son? That already didn't work, was I supposed to ask to tell my little boy, the one that's left behind, that all you have to do is believe in God and good things will happen to you? He would say, I close my eyes at night and it's black. Is that where Christopher is? So, I had my own grief, and then I had my grief in my marriage. And then I had the grief of a little boy who just didn't get it, because why should he get it? So I will call myself lucky now. Do I think that I was lucky that happened to me? Absolutely not. It's certain things I learned along the way in my grief group online. We were fortunate in that, I should say one thing. Some people think, and this is a pet peeve of mine, but I don't really respond to it. Okay, so I know I'm going to forget. I'm going to do that before the pet peeve. So we were fortunate that we had a good enough living that the first Christmas after Christopher passed, we could go away. We could get on a plane and go to Hawaii. We went before Christmas, so we found a really good deal, but we could do that. there was another woman in my group who her child died of a grand mal seizure, and they lost because of the medical bills. Now, my husband had really good insurance, so the most we paid to that New York City hospital was $5,000. Everything else was covered.
Wow.
Pretty incredible. They lost their family home that was in the home for 3 generations. Both parents lost their job, and they lost their child.
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, I can say, yeah, I could do things that other people couldn't do. So I was fortunate that way. But if somebody else told me I was fortunate, I don't think I'd take it very well, if that makes sense. My pet peeve, I know I'm going on a tangent, but sometimes people will say like, oh, it happened in my grief group. Now, everybody in my grief group was in deep grief. So don't get me wrong. Like, you can't hold anything against anyone because we're all in deep grief. But she's like, my loss is so much harder than your loss because my child died suddenly. And I said, yeah, I am so sorry that happened to you. And that is terrible. But your child was healthy up until the day they died. You didn't have to deal. And the thing is people think that when your child has cancer, that you're ready. The day he went into a coma, we were talking about Halloween and the costumes we would buy when he went home. Like, I thought he was better because his fever went away. So I guess I'm saying it for your listeners, is that we make decisions in our mind, what's easier and what's harder. And we say things to people. And because it's been said to me before, not just that woman who was in deep grief. And I think I say dumb things. I've said dumb things. I've said dumb things with this journey. But my husband is he was so much gentler. He's like, Suzanne, why are you comparing grief? It's all terrible. Stop comparing.
Yeah. Comparative suffering is a very vicious cycle that can get you to spiral in a negative. And I've been there as well. So yeah, I do understand that. Do you think that your gratitude journal, shifting your mindset, helped you see, like you said, somebody else couldn't call you lucky, but you could see things that were,
Yes.
Do you think that helped that mindset shift for you?
Most definitely. Most definitely. Because we took the kids and my nephew Jake to go play mini golf a week after he relapsed. And, we came home and just what we focused on, like that they could play. It changed my mindset a bazillion. I wrote about, I wish I could find an example for you, but I wrote about, we would toss the football at night. Oh, here's an example. 1 week, because I journaled everything. 1 week after he was discharged from the hospital, I think mini golf was 2 weeks. The 3 of us, meaning my boys and myself, sat around the kitchen table and talked about the good things in our day. And that was 1 week. And if I didn't write it in a journal, I wouldn't have believed it, because and he said, Mom, I know I'm sick, but I don't feel sick. And I was grateful that he was home. So and that night we went out and tossed a football in the front yard, even though I'm not very good at football, but we just went out and did it, and my husband was home too. Yeah, it shifted me so completely. I teach everything that helped me to my students now. And, I bring it to them. I do a lot of mantra meditations that helps change the brain waves. Yeah, I really do see myself as lucky, and lucky with my current life. Lucky that I went to church today, and I hadn't been to church in a very long time. I didn't go during the pandemic and hadn't been in a very long time. And I felt the need to go today, and I went. And I ran into a friend of mine who knew me during my journey. And she's like, you are amazing. It's so beautiful to see who you are. Because in my 3rd episode of my podcast, the woman I interviewed said, I traveled with you through Christopher's death. And you're just, now I teach people to find their light. I teach people to recognize the joy in the hard. I teach people to see their own strength because I teach a lot of middle-aged women too. I teach 3 different populations. And the reason I'm writing the book and doing the podcast is I want people to know there's joy in the hard, light in the dark, and that you are so much stronger than you think you are. Whatever you're going through, you are so much stronger because if I could do this, you could do this.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's so beautiful. And one other question I had, if and when, I guess you didn't, I don't know if you answered this, if and when you did forgive God, did you feel a weight lifted, or what was that feeling like?
I don't think I think it was more gradual because I
Mm-hmm.
think maybe when I was praying to him and talking to him, I was still angry at him.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So, but I can give you the example. It was a long time out. I think it was gradual, but this was the best way to say it. So around 2013, so 6 years after Christopher died, I got an email to teach yoga to kids fighting cancer. And I deleted it. I was like, absolutely not. No way. And then the email came around again. I was part of a group that taught different populations. And an email came around again, and they were still looking for a teacher. And I heard a whisper, and I knew it wasn't mine. I knew it was God. And he said, do it. It's not just about the kids.
Mm.
It's for you too. And so one of the things, the reason I couldn't be around kids fighting cancer, I didn't even call it fighting cancer. I'd say kids on chemo because a lot of the times you're in remission. And that's what I always said about my son. I never said he had cancer. I always said he was on chemo because he didn't have cancer. He was in remission.
Right.
But so I always was like, I can't. Oh, so I had a lot of shame. I was envious of kids who were beating cancer. And I had so much shame around it because who can be envious of a child fighting cancer, right? But I was like, why do they get to live and my son didn't? And then I went and taught these kids yoga. And some people came and shadowed me. Other teachers came and shadowed me. And they're like, oh my gosh, you are the perfect person to do this. Because I know what it's like to have a kid on an IV pole. You can play tag with your child on the IV pole. You can practice yoga. You just make sure the line's long enough, you know?
Right.
And so I would work with the kids. They didn't know my story. The staff did. I didn't want, you never, if your child's fighting cancer, you never want to know that someone's child died, even though I really point out if anybody's listening to this and they're in that journey. My son passed 16 years ago. The medicines are so much better. And, really know that even from 4.5 years from the first treatment to the second, so many things changed. So I don't want anybody to ever be scared when they hear my story because things have changed so much. But so I taught the kids, and that Thanksgiving, so I realized the kids that I was working with were my son, and the moms were me. And that Thanksgiving, this is where I felt the lift. I wrote a thank you letter to every sibling, my parents, my dad had passed, but to everyone, Rich, Ryan, my mother-in-law, everyone got a thank you letter, a very, very specific thank you just to do with them. And it was why I appreciated them. Mm-hmm. And there was such a lift of going in and working with those kids. And it was definitely like God knew what he was telling me. And there were things that happened. I'm going to do a blog post on it, how I almost quit, not blog. I'll do an episode on this, just like a mini episode. I don't want to get into it now because I know we're already at almost an hour, but whereas I almost quit because I had a really tough day, but then I found God at the inspection station, which is really crazy, but that's for another time. I can come on again to tell you.
I would love that. I think your story is a very beautiful story, Suzanne. Thank you so much for sharing. And as we wrap up, I could talk to you for hours. I just love listening to you. looking back at your seasons, multiple seasons of courage, and I guess one thing before I actually interject on that, I would love to say, you said you didn't want to pretend like Christopher didn't exist, like, and through the grieving process, and everybody grieves differently. And one thing I just love to know is that you carrying forward his foundation and you teaching kids with yoga, like you're living for, he's living through you and you're sharing that with other people. So I don't know if you see that or notice that, but I notice it in you and I see what you're doing in your life as carrying on his legacy, and that's very courageous and very beautiful of you to do. So I just wanted to make note of that.
No, I thank you. He sends me signs all the time. Like
Good.
All the time I get signs. So thank you.
Wonderful, very wonderful. Looking back, hindsight 2020, what would you have told your old self before stepping into these seasons of courage, knowing what you know now?
I would have told myself not to worry as much. When he was fighting the third cancer, we were at the playground. What was great about this New York City hospital is treatment was on an outpatient basis. So he could come home, which was huge, because with the type of cancer he had, that's not common at other hospitals. So we were all at the park playing, and I there was a sandbox near where they were playing, and my younger siblings had impetigo when they were younger. And I remember I had that experience actually and I looked at the sandbox and I thought, I wish I could have, I wish I could have worried less about the treatable illnesses. Mm. I mean, I didn't, or the childhood illnesses. I don't mean treatable. I thought my son's cancers were all treatable. Like they said, we have treatments until they said we don't, so, but they treated him up until the day he died. So, but I would just remember thinking, so that would be my younger self. Like, just don't worry so much about if he eats the wrong thing, or I had worried that everything was life or death. That's why I worried about it. So yeah, worry less, I would say. And I probably think that's what people say on their deathbed, worry less,
Yeah. Because it consumes us.
It does.
It really does. Suzanne, well, thank you so much. And if you wouldn't mind sharing with the listeners where everybody can find you or connect with you, reach out to you, I'd love that.
Oh, sure. So I have a website, and it's on that website. I have a lot of healing tips. We didn't really get into Shin Jyutsu. I have healing tips. I have yoga. I have a little bit more about like how you can find my podcast. And so that's at SuzanneABarron.com. Suzanne A for my middle initial Andora, and then Barron, Barron. And then my foundation is Christopher Barron Live, Live, Life, Life.org. And then on Instagram and Facebook, it's Suzanne Andora Barron Oh, I forgot my podcast. And then my podcast is Finding Joy in the Hard.
Awesome. Well, Suzanne, thank you so much for coming on here today and taking your time to share your beautiful journey and your beautiful story, and just to keep doing what you're doing. And I appreciate you so much.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me, Leslie. I really appreciate it.
Have a great day. Thank you for joining me and listening to the Kindred Journey Podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please consider taking the time to rate and review the podcast and share this episode with family and friends who you think might enjoy it. Your positive feedback helps me reach more courageous women like you. This is my passion project, so without you, I wouldn't be here doing this, and I deeply appreciate your support. Until next time.